This is All India Radio. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on ease of wholesale price index inflation to a 29-month low and record investment in Q4. The participants are Udyan, Economic Analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, AIR Correspondent.
I'm joined by Shri Udyan Ray, with whom we will discuss at length on the wholesale price index, the WPI inflation data, which is now to a 29-month low, and record investments in the fourth quarter of the previous financial year. Udyan, a warm welcome to you on this program.
Thank you so much, Arjun.
For the benefit of our listeners, before we go into the wholesale price index data, which is at a 29-month low at 1.4%, could you tell us the difference between the wholesale price index and the consumer price index, and why is there a difference between the two?
Well, Arjun, to put it in very simple words, wholesale price index represents the inflation which producers, people who are manufacturing, producing things, the price rise which they face, which they experience, it measures that. Whereas retail inflation or consumer price inflation is all about the price which people like you and me face. And there are, within consumer price inflation, there are categories. There are industrial workers, there's one, then urban workers, there's another variant of that. You mentioned about the difference. It's in the composition of what are the items that are included in wholesale price index and consumer price index, or what is included. So in wholesale prices, and where you're capturing the data from, so in wholesale prices, you'll have lots of things which will be at the business end of inflation. So it is showing you at the level at which producers are facing price rise. And then consumer price inflation or retail inflation is what people like you and me, say industrial workers or non-manual workers, are facing. So that is basically the difference between the two.
So then we're talking about the WPI for the month of March, which is at 1.34%, because there has been some moderation in the prices of manufactured products, commodity prices, and a favorable base effect. This is according to the data released by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry this Monday itself. Are we likely to see the pass on of these benefits of a lower price rise to the consumer as well, and an improvement in the CPI?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arjun. But at the same time, one needs to point out, which a lot of people have already pointed out, is that the WPI or the wholesale price inflation that you're seeing, the reason why it's low is because typically you compare it from a comparable period last year. So it's a year-on-year comparison. Now, because it was so high last year around this time, therefore what's happening is on a larger base, you'll need to have a much larger increase for it to show a higher percentage change. So it's like you were at 100 and now you're at 101 point something. So if you're at the change has been only this much, you're at 100, and which is pretty high. Therefore, what's happening is it's actually showing lower sort of a rate. But having said that, despite the statistical quirky nature of this figure, there's no doubt that there are many elements out there which are showing lots of positive changes. There's been a kind of a moderation that's happening. You're seeing in certain food items. There are other areas, there's some little bit of moderation that's happening. And you will obviously see them get translated also in consumer inflation or retail inflation whenever the figures come. The other important part, Arjun, is also that when inflation goes up and interest rates are raised, they have the first point of impact typically tends to be in wholesale price index. And it also indicates that demand is getting softened a bit. So when that softening happens, you will find that softening also getting reflected in retail or consumer price inflation. So if you were to compare a period of low inflation where demand was soft, we can go back about 20 years back when you had these 1 point plus WPI kind of figures, and there the demand was kind of soft. And then, of course, when demand takes off, then you have WPI and CPI both rising. So these go through in cycles. But some of it is also a reflection of the fact that some of the inflation fighting steps that have been taken by Reserve Bank of India in terms of raising interest rate, that's actually getting reflected by these figures.
So then in March of 2022, the inflation rate was at 14.63%, the base effect that you are mentioning, and now it's gone up by 1.34% in comparison to that. So what has been the steps taken by the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, to moderate inflation, to make purchasing affordable for the common man and for business for that matter?
Well, Arjun, the irony of inflation is that to bring down prices eventually, in the short term, you have to raise prices. You have to cool down the demand, make people buy things a little less, or make them postpone their purchases a little bit, make the suppliers adjust to things, make them produce things in a more smarter and more productivity enhanced way. You try to do that. By doing that, you try to bring the system into a better position. So what the Reserve Bank, our central bank, has been doing is it's raised interest rates by 2.5 percentage points or 250 basis points. So because of that increase that has happened, when the central government raises those interest rates, immediately for whether it's fixed deposits or for loans, here we should be talking about loans because that's an input cost. If somebody takes a loan in a business and then funds the operations. So basically what happens is because of those interest rates going up, what has happened is the cost of conducting business has gone up, and as a result your prices go up. And that actually, when prices go up, it softens the demand a little bit, and therefore what happens is, essentially, Arjun, one way of looking at inflation is lots of money or money chasing too few goods or services. You're not being able to produce as fast as demand is happening. So you're trying to balance the thing. So it's a lot of money chasing too few goods or services. So you want to fix it. You want to fix the supply side so that there's a balance. If it's like a seesaw and it's loaded in favor of supply, you want to make the balance come back. So that's what the government has been trying to do. Reserve Bank has been trying to do, and it looks like that is impacting. And in the short term, what's going to happen is, even though inflation is going to come down and it's going to show up, it's doing so, it is going to impact people's ability to buy things because things have become more expensive. So the irony of fighting inflation is that you need to raise the prices some more for I mentioned this seesaw kind of a balance kind of a thing. To get the balance back in the system, you'll have to do that.
So apart from the central bank increasing the repo rate, the 6.5% as it stands now, and they've paused it as well, what about the supply chain side? How does the government ensure that that is managed properly so that prices are again moderated as another measure in addition to interest rates?
Well, Arjun, because we are a globalized economy, a lot of the inputs that we get are from outside. So in a globalized economy, you will need stuff from there. And Arjun, as we are all aware, because of the pandemic situation, those supplies got hit. And after that, a lot of things have been done across the countries to make things more efficient. So there are some things which our government or our companies can control and some they cannot control. So stuff that's happening outside you cannot control. You can get into negotiation, try to get into a system of cooperation. You can do that, and that's happening. And things are getting better. However, the part that you can control is you can estimate your demand better. You can have smarter tools. You can store better. You can transport better. You can have a better logistics system. You can have better roads. You can have better warehouses. You can have better taxation system, which has happened. You have now GST. You have more uniform regulation so that compliance is not cumbersome and multiple points of compliance is not there. So all these things, if you start ensuring that, and the key of getting a handle on inflation typically is making the system more productive. If you're manufacturing, you have a smarter manufacturing, you digitize, robotify, whatever you want to do. And then the government level, you have policies which encourage. So if you didn't have enough warehouses, you ensure that there's nothing coming in the way of private or government players coming up with better warehousing, better storage, policies that do not hamper this growth. And Arjun, what has also happened is the recent pandemic has also revolutionized almost the whole logistics scene across the globe. So we are undergoing that change, and because of that change, eventually you'll find maybe 6 or 10 months down the line, it's already coming down across the world, and in our country it will come to much, much more manageable levels than what it is even now.
So right now, the study is suggesting that there has been a fall in prices of basic metals, food products, textiles, non-food articles, minerals, rubber and plastic products, crude petroleum, and natural gas and paper products. Now, in this, the two important items for consumers has been oil prices and, of course, food and drink prices as well. How do you see moderation in that, and where do you see a supply chain as being managed by the government to ensure that it's affordable by everyone?
Arjun, the issue with food in our country is it also tends to have a seasonal sort of a effect. So the good part is the vegetables, I think the figures are promising, but the dairy continues to be an area of slight worry because it's sticky. The high prices are looking to be sticky because the input prices, it seems, have gone up and they're remaining at an elevated level. So those things, as you rightly pointed out, are there. Some of it is seasonality. Agriculture is a state subject. So union government can only do so much. They can facilitate things. So in this inflation controlling efforts, state governments also will have to pitch in. So it pretty much depends on what state governments are also doing. So inflation combating, you cannot say that it is strictly the preserve of the union government. There are steps which state governments can also take to make things a little easier for the citizens of that particular state.
Invariably, the discussion tends to gravitate towards primary articles and fuel, but that is a domain really of CPI. Usually when we talk about the WPI inflation data, we're talking about manufactured products, which composes 64% of the total index, and then you have primary articles of 22.6%, fuel and power, which is 13.2% of the total weight. So how do you skew the data in such a manner that wholesale price index comes down? How do manufactured goods actually come down substantially, even though they depend a great deal on primary articles, they depend upon fuel and power for the production?
Actually, Arjun, that is also the challenge for us because we import most of the fuel and oil prices have been elevated and they have been uncomfortably at elevated levels. And also, whether things like coal, etc., there also we depend on import. So when you're depending on imports, it's also your currency becomes important. We have seen a little bit of erosion, or shall we say depreciation in our currency as well, and it's against the dollar because that's the international currency in which trade happens. So we have faced that brunt quite a bit. But the good part is, Arjun, I think that part where pain that we experienced in 2022, I think that is probably behind us. And some of the monetary authority steps that were happening, see, the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates, and because of which rates were going up in the US and dollar was strengthening. Those steps probably will culminate at some point during this year, or will look like you'll know where it's going to end. So that suffering, that unknown uncertainty, that how much more difficulty you'll have, that bit is probably behind us. So we are probably looking at a far easier landscape in terms of navigation, in terms of the road ahead or the journey ahead. So that's probably going to get better. So coming back, some of those elements in WPI are not controllable. Whether it's fuel and energy related, we import. So we cannot control if our currency is depreciating, those prices are going high. But having said that, I wouldn't say that it's again the base effect. It's gone up. Now the question is it going to go up that much more? Again, that looks unlikely at the moment, Arjun. So therefore, what you're going to see that now from here on, you'll probably find a deceleration. If you're going at a fourth gear in a car, it's probably going to go to third or second gear.
So we're also looking at FDI inflows into the economy. There's been a great deal of infrastructure layout which has been long-term, but now it is clearly impacting goods flow in a very positive way. You mentioned about currency exchange. There has been all kinds of agreements in place now to also import by paying in rupees, and also that the rupee is now being considered as an international currency. If you go to the Middle East, for instance, you can use the rupee to buy goods and services without having to convert it into foreign exchange. Do you see all of this playing a very important role in reducing the inflationary impact on the economy?
No doubt, Arjun. Because if you look at Indian rupee versus other currency, we haven't done badly at all. It's just that against the dollar we have suffered. And because most of the trade is dollar denominated, that suffering and pain has happened across the globe. And therefore, people are now trying to trade or do trade in currencies other than the dollar. They've been forced into that. So if it's 15 countries, I suspect it will go up more. The question is how much more of trade we can do so that we can conserve that dollar forex reserve. When we talk of forex reserve, we're talking about reserves of dollars actually. So if we can do that, that will really help and it will control the inflation quite a bit. That's an important point that you pointed out.
Thank you so much, Udyan, for being with us on this program and discussing at length how the wholesale price index is now eased to 1.32% for the month of March, and how investments in the fourth quarter has helped the Indian economy.
Thank you so much, Arjun.
You were listening to a discussion on ease of wholesale price index inflation at a 29-month low and record investment in Q4. The participants were Udyan, Economic Analyst, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio.